Now it's recording, right? How does that look? All right, so today we're going to be talking about the mouth and the ear, but we do want to finish talking about the nose. We did the eye last week, but we also talked about the overall structure, the egg, and then of course coming down the side of the head into the cheek, or in this case the muscles that are coming from the zygomatic down to the angle of the jaw. And so that creates these regions. The first region here that we want to talk about is the nose. The nose basically is coming from underneath the brow and then dropping down in this area over top of the dental forms or the muzzle forms. But you know, we always talk about these things in relationship to the underlying bony structure. And in this case, we remember what we did when we modeled our skulls, the shape of that cheekbone, but also the shape of that nose, which really ends up being, in terms of the bone, it kind of ends right about halfway. In this case, maybe right about there, according to my portrait. But then as we come down, we're getting all this this dental form, or this muzzle region. So the first way to conceive of this, can I have a little bit of clay out of that barrel, is as a pyramidal structure, which is really just these several planes, you know, the top plane. So it's different than, come on over, Lily. It's different than you might imagine, where it's a corner or a fold here and then it comes down. So I think the wrong way to imagine the nose is this like maybe triangular form like this. That might work for some people, but for the most part, it's better to conceive of the nose as this flat plane that comes down here, and really establishing that angle becomes important. So we want to conceive of it as this flat plane that comes down, and we already measured this pin, remember, okay? So you should be starting at that pin at the glabella here, and then coming down. So really observing that angle, in this case, maybe I should be chopping it down just a little bit more. And then you can very easily, of course this becomes a guess at where it ends, but then we can very easily measure it. You can see where I'm just using my tool and then my finger to gauge the dimension of it, and I can say it stops there. And then from there we would have this flat plane on top that's governing then the way it sweeps to the side. In this case, we're drawing it, I'm basically talking about this region right in here, okay? And there's an angle there, but I'm gonna create a nuance on that. So, but just getting this planar structure, or this rectilinear structure set up is really quite important. Okay? So then we can get the bottom of that angle, right? Now, it also, remember that what's happening is from that angle, it comes back in into the face, right? So observing that line that comes from the inside of the eye, right? So one of the things that we forget about is this depth. There's this depth from the side of the nose underneath the brow. Now I'm going to talk more about that, But getting a sense of that depth is really crucial to your observation. So from there, that corner of the nose comes out. Again, we're just observing its angle. And then, of course, where does it end? This becomes important, this depth of the nose, because you can see that if you were to push in a little bit too deep, it would make the nose look very big, even though it has the right angle and length. So just by digging in too far is going to make the nose look too big. Or vice versa, if I pull the nose too far out, you know, it's going to look smaller. So the depth of the nostril right there is going to be important. So really all I've set up now is I've set up a couple different planes. The top plane and the side plane. And of course, like always, the only thing I'm doing here, I'm working on one side, whereas when you model it, you would definitely work both sides. And in this case, because it's one of those forms that's still symmetrical, but it's sitting on the center line, one of the things you have to do is get the width of it correctly. And in this case, you know, I'm using my tool here, but you could use your calipers. Okay. Now, what did I do? I created that pyramid, that triangular form, this rectilinear form here. And that's going to carry all the proportions. You saw that I made a guess about where it's coming, or I know where it's coming from because I have a pin there. But how long it is, I guessed at its angle, then I adjusted its angle. I made a guess at the length, and I measured the length, and then I adjusted it. And it's the same thing with the sides. I know that I wanted to go in a certain way, certain dimension, and then what's the angle coming out, and how long that is, and then of course how deep the nose is. Now those proportions are going to be governed by that, you know, that volumetric structure. Remember what I talked about is that the volume is a form that is rational and cohesive, right, and also contiguous. So it means that there's a lot of things that ride along that structure. We know that we know that by describing it this way, that it has that certain symmetry on the other side. So from there, one of the things you have to then differentiate is some of the subforms, okay? So now we go from volume to surface. Surface includes, you know, whether the nostrils, how round this is, but there's a couple forms that you're going to pay attention to, okay? Can you get me a softer ball of clay? Or is it right here? Okay. Okay. So the forms that we're going to pay attention to, aside from the bridge of the nose here, which there's not much differentiation here, but very often you'll start to see a little shape along here, which is the shape of the bone, and then it very often will dip in. Now, I'm going to talk about this again. I've already threatened to talk about it. But then from here, what you're going to see are what are called wings of the nose. And that's this muscle that actually fits in here like this. Okay? You see that shape? Now you're going to see it on my self-portrait here. It's this area right here. And what that is your snarling muscle, or the muscle that levitates your top lip. Okay? And it kind of fills in that gap. So one of the things that happens is we conceive of this line as this corner, this interior corner in a planar structure. But then we realize that simplification tends to go deeper past the shape of the nose, which is important. When you look at it, you're going to see this convex form. And if you look at it around the room and look at other people, you'll see that form coming down off the side of their nose. And if you were to look past that, it's going to look awfully weird to say, okay, let's, you know, it collapses the side of the nose. So that's the second form. And then the tip of the nose, or the nostril forms, tend to look a little bit, the first thing you're going to see is that there's this roundness up front, okay? So there's this teardrop form that comes down in the front here, and this is all cartilage form. Usually will come from the sides right in through here. Can you guys see that? And then round over. Now again, this changes from individual, but it also changes over time in an individual. This is cartilage, and so as you age, your cartilage in your nose gets bigger and bigger and continues to grow. So that's why you see older people with longer noses. And then next to that form, you have this nostril form, and that usually, now you're going to have to really look at this, because what it really is a reverse teardrop that comes down like this. It almost comes up and then over and around. So the bulbous end of the teardrop is here, and then maybe swings down underneath. And in this case, the actual hole is governed by that shape. So it comes up and around like this. Doop. Where's the rest of my tools? Okay, so I have this tool here. Doop. Okay, so does that make sense? There's really not, again, you could probably find a lot of subtlety in individuals, but those are the main forms you want to look at when you are dealing with the nose. That longer, or the pyramidal shape, and then you would get the wings of the nose, the nostril. You could actually call the wings of the nose teardrop shape, if it makes it easier for you to remember, but there's not too many with the nose. And ultimately it's about proportion anyway, right? You really just want to get the size and shape of it, and then these subforms right along it. The mouth is a similar structure in that what you're going to want to do as you come down. Now it tends to sit underneath of the nose, meaning the shape of the whole thing, this is what I'm talking about, the muzzle form, right? This sort of, again, dental region, which emerges or is really kind of tucked underneath both the cheeks over here and the nose here, and it kind of rides underneath in this rounded form. If I were to bend down and look up, you know, maybe the GoPro needs to look up, you would see this shape that is round in this direction, okay? And that becomes important. What's the projection line? What's the projection line here compared to how deep it goes? In this case, that's this line. Again, I'm not really talking about those subforms yet. I'm really talking about these forms. Let me make that more graphic. Something like that, something like this. So if I were to take it into a prismatic, or let's call it volumetric structure, you would see this form here. Now, in this book here, I've showed you this before. It's a very interesting book, and it gives you a good breakdown of some of these forms. So take a look at that. It really does help. Does that make sense from a structural point of view? By the way, the nose very often has these upswings in the planes like that. If I was mean, I might require everybody to create this planar structure. But for now, we're going to see it comes. You know, you could say that the front plane comes down from the wing or from the nostril. We've already established this line as the line for the zygomatic down to the or the muscular form, which is the masseter muscle. In this case, you'll look here. This is basically what I'm drawing, but it's much more full than I've recognized here. This is mainly to be very graphic, so you can actually see it, and you might be able to look around the room and see different people's structure. But in my case, I'm going to show you how that fills in a little bit. So this is what you should be looking for. And it's important because, again, just like with the nose, it gives you a certain dimension, right? In this case, it's dimension down to the chin. It also gives you a sense of how wide the dental region or the muzzle region is. In this case, it's kind of going like that, right? But it also gives you this projection into space and this this overall structure. Very often when I do it like this, so that for me to be explicit, I'm doing it in a way to be very graphic so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. You don't have to go through like I was doing and being very careful about these lines and these planes. One of the things you'll do is just know it and imagine your way through it, okay? So in a lot of ways, this is a way for me to try to build that construction in your head so that when you're looking at this, you'll be able to see past the subtleties, see past the chaos of the individual. Okay, so from there, what I'm going to do is now there's some, we want to describe the mouth. Now the mouth itself, we can start with where the two lips come together, and that's generally, you know, there's a lot of ways you can measure that, but let's say that it's the top third. So you could break it down into thirds from the bottom of the nose to here. And I could say that's where the lips are coming together, and then this line here becomes the top of the chin. Is that perfect? You know, it's not going to really work on every individual, and it doesn't really even work for me, but it's a great place to start. And what it reminds you is that the lips are generally closer to the bottom of the nose than they are to the bottom of the chin. Okay? So if I draw that line there, and then maybe that's a guess, and so what I can do is just do a quick measurement of where I might want to be. And yeah, I would drop my, this is just me doing a little sketching on the surface, which is always important when you're modeling. Sketching on the surface really is just a way of asking questions, right? And looking for feedback. So what I'll do is I have now the line that I'm happy with there, and what I'm going to do is look for a series of convexities. And the series of convexities will include, and in no particular order, there are going to be the outside wing of the mouth, the upper lip, 2, and then a third in the center, outside wing of the lips, and then really just 2 for the bottom lip, okay? And I'm going to describe, now you might say, well, what about all these forms on the inside? They're actually incorporated into this. And then one last one for the mental process, or the chin. You see that? So how many did I count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So those are the 8 forms that we can find on most individuals, and we can extrapolate. At the museum, I did this for a couple of you, where I pointed to those forms. And it's just like with the eye, you know, there's only a few forms that can be oriented or played with to create the individual. So in this case, that's the outside wing. We might look for the upper lip and then the lower lips. Now, let me see if I can't draw this out. I should do this on the blackboard, but I might be able to do it right here. How could I do this? Well, I'll just model it. Okay? So the first thing you're going to do here is you're going to separate the upper lip and the lower lip. Okay? Then what you're going to see is that upper lip, I'm adding clay, and it's going to be a full convexity of that upper lip, coming from underneath the nose all the way down into the mouth. Now that upper lip will, you know, in some cases on different individuals have a hard line, okay? And I can look around the room and, you know, it just so happens that my lips tend to be awfully flat and, you know, lack of color. It might be because I'm just, you know, I'm just old. But most people will have this kind of sharp line, and that sharp line I will describe in a second here, but you need these 2 convex masses. And again, going back to this outside, you have this wing, which is this, what would you call this? The teardrop shape that's coming from right around the corner of the nose and then down like this. And then a convexity here, which I already put in, and a convexity there. And then we have a convexity here. When I say convexity, you guys know what I mean, which is just like a projection outward, right? It's a rounded convex form. Then another projection there, and then another here. So let me do the side of the lips too. I'll do this side just for symmetry. Now, if I were to take I were to take the upper lip and put a little down plane on it. That down plane is going to represent a color change. So that even though all of this is a convexity right in here, if you can't see this, come in close. But all of this is a convexity in through here. Do you ever notice, like, there's a convention of the lips that looks kind of like this, right? Right? You may have seen that. Where does that come from? Well, the first place it comes from is this idea that there is this little divot between the nose, and it comes out, it's basically the way your lips grow when as you're going from fetus to baby, and it's essentially a growth form, and it's this kind of ribbony trench that comes from underneath the nose and then around. And you might be able to look around and see that form, this upper lip form, will extend into the nostril itself. So that sometimes happens, and then comes down and around this way. That little trench right there, you know what that's for, right? You know what it's for. That's for when you're 2 years old and you got a boogery nose, that it drips down into your mouth. It's like a gutter. If you've had little children in your household, you would know that's true. But what this is still a convex form. You see how I've made it very graphic. Here's the convex form right there. Doop. But let me turn it into something a lot more subtle so that you can see that I'm correct about this. The next form that I had mentioned was this center form right in there. Okay? Come in close if you can't see. That center form is then on top of this, which then creates this line that's right here. Do 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 do. Do you see that? Okay. And then underneath it, you'll get this, joop, like that. Again, I'm exaggerating. My lips are more subtle and through here. But I'm doing it so that you can see it over there. And then underneath, we have two larger forms that are basically coming from here and then wrapping around like this underneath. I mean, you could break that down into multiple forms, but I think for simplicity we break it down into one, or really just two, because it's symmetrical. And then again, there's the form break that's here, but if you look really closely, there's a convexity here, but then it extends down below the lips here. The same way the convexity appears to be here, but it actually comes up and around and tucks underneath the nose. And that's the same thing here. And the form break is where the color changes on the lips. Now, this becomes important because I mentioned that I was going to talk about this up here. And maybe you've heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again, is that one of the things you're incorporating into your modeling is color, okay? It becomes very evident. We talked about it at the museum, right, where the eye color change is going to be deeper. They might hollow out an eye to create a pupil, right? But it's also true that the corners of my eyes, when I haven't had enough sleep, right, I get dark circles under the eyes. And that generally means that there's darkness right in through here. You can actually model that in by going deeper into the eyes in here. So if you wanted me to look tired, then you might go in deeper here. And what is that doing? It's catching more shadow, so there's more shadow in there. It still represents the forms, especially the projections and the extremities, but we incorporate a little bit of that shadow, again, to catch light or really cast a shadow. And you can also do that in the eye where you create a pupil. That's also true with the lips. You know, there's a discernible color change on lips, usually. Some individuals more than others. And so what you would do there is incorporate either a more exaggerated down plane or a more exaggerated form change. So in this case, what we could do is put a strong corner on it that would indicate a color change. And the down plane is also catching shadow to call to mind that color change. But in my case, like I was saying, I don't have a lot of that as an as a form, so most of this would end up being pretty soft. So as I model this, I would subdue all that because I don't need all that. My lips tend to be colorless. Okay? Does that make sense? What time is it? All right, I haven't been talking as long as I thought I was. How do you guys feel? Do you want me to go through the ear right now so we can get it done? Okay. Let's talk about the ear. Is my recording still going? Okay. So the ear is actually kind of easy. So you guys have any questions about that? That makes a lot of sense, right? Boy, your minds are just like buzzing, isn't it? Do you feel your minds buzzing with anticipation of doing it on your own? Do you feel it like I do? Oh, good. I see a lot of nodding, which is good. So the ear is different than a lot of the other forms because it really can be just separated from the rest of the head, right? You could just like kind of take it off and move it around if you need to, because it's different than the eyes and the nose and the mouth, is that they tend to be well incorporated into the structure, but the ear is a little bit different that way. So the first thing we had talked about is this sense that it starts at about halfway from front to back, meaning the front of the brow essentially to the back of the head approximately. You get a center line. This casting has a bad ear, so one of the other castings will be better as an illustration. And what I'm going to do is draw this out as best I can, and you guys are going to say, probably, wow, that's way more simple than I thought it was going to be. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to see this system, and we could break this down into maybe a couple straight lines. The first one, well, let's just call it let's just call this a quadrilateral, okay? You see that quadrilateral right here? Boom, straight line, okay? Now, that quadrilateral means that there's the shape kind of peaks up here, and then there's this long tail that comes down. And then we turn that into a spiral by coming from the inside of the ear all the way up and around. And in this case, we might add more clay up here to turn that into a spiral. Okay, so that's the outside spiral of the ear. And that's just the shape of it. And then it comes down, and then what you might want to do is come back in on this bottom corner and turn it into a lobe, okay? Like that. So really that's just the outside border of the ear. Now that spiral starts from here, and it starts way deep inside of what's called the conch, or the hole. This is where you put your earbuds, right? And then it kind of springs out in this kind of ribbony form right in there. And yeah, I see some of you digging at your ear. Go ahead and feel the ear, but you can see it here. It springs from here, right? And then comes up and around. It's very ribbony as it comes over through here. Ribbony meaning like it's thin. Maybe, some of you have pierced holes in that form in your life, but you're able to do that pretty easily. I don't know how painful it is, but does anybody have a piercing in that part of your? All right, maybe some of you. So ribbony coming down, and then of course it gets a little bit softer and rounder and more fleshy as it comes down all the way to the lobe here, okay? So all this is really the same spiral. There's the lobe. In my case, it's separated, not, was anyway. And then, but some people will have it attached, other people will have it, this from like genetics or, 9th grade biology class. And then from there, on the inside, so what I've actually described is this form, this outside form through here. This trench that comes up and around is only described by convex forms. The next one that will come from here and then drive its way up in this kind of branching form. So from here and drives it up to here, okay? So you get this branch right in there. So that branch comes from here up, boop, and then up like this. So what I'm going to do is describe that pretty well. And the branch is really just two forms. Usually it comes and kind of dives in here like this, and then there's and that's usually the stronger form, and then there's a smaller form that dives into there like that. Okay? But that's creating that hollow form right next to it, right in there, which comes around like this. So this is what's called the tragus and the antitragus. So this branching form at its root, you know, you could put all these forms together, but you have these two forms coming together. This one and this one. Not sure if I'm illustrating that best. Okay? So this is where you stick your earbuds, right? I think I have like a large ear over there for illustration. I'll pull that out in a second. But that's basically it. So what did I describe? I described the quadrilateral, the spiral that runs along that quadrilateral. The quadrilateral is what you want to establish first so that you get the height and the dimensions of it and how it sits on the head. Then you establish the spiral. The spiral is, you know, can be turned into a little bit more complex by adding the lobe. And then this branching form that comes up and tucks underneath of that spiral right in here. Very often this is very concave, which is also describing that interior spot, which is, this is where you would stick your earbuds. But these two little nodes, one is the side right here. That's the tragus, which is right there coming off the side of your head, and then an antitragus, and that was put there to hold your earbuds in. Okay? Does that make sense? So it's not that much information, and when you look at it, you'll say, oh yeah, it looks like a whole bunch of complexity and all this, you know, ins and outs, but really everybody, if you look around the room, it's surprising how stable that form is across individuals. Okay? Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about that? Right? It's all very clear. Again, you're feeling the buzz of energy, of wanting to get back to it, right? I think so, right? Any questions? Okay. All right. Because, you know, like if we include that in this video, it might help other individuals. Okay. But, okay, we'll work on that, and you guys will have your questions. So, okay? Let's take a break. I'm going to press